In Yu-Gi-Oh!, cards that say when you can have a very tight timing window to be able to get their effects off. Missing the timing is something that happens when you cannot activate a card's effect due to the way the other cards in the chain resolve. In this video, we're going to be going over the best cards that can miss timing. And at number 10, we have Geartown. This is a field spell that lets both players normal summon ancient gear monsters for 1 less tribute. It also has a floating effect. When it's destroyed, you can special summon 1 ancient gear monster from your hand, deck, or graveyard. Even though ancient gears were never a competitive archetype in the TCG, this card's on destruction effect let it see a fair amount of play during early Yu-Gi-Oh formats. The namesake of the archetype, Golem, can't be special summoned, but you can still go into ancient gear Torrential Dragon. This is a 3000 attack beatstick that doesn't let your opponent respond with spells and trap when it's attacking, letting you play around many popular battle-related staples at the time. But how would you reliably pop this card to get Galvatron out? Well, this has to do with how field spells worked before Master Rule 3. Back then, if a field spell was activated while there was another one on the field, the first one would get destroyed. Unlike today, where in such situations it just gets sent to the graveyard. If you activated a Geartown on your previous one, the old one would get destroyed, but it would also miss timing since the last thing that happened was the new one getting activated. But if you simply set it over the old one instead, face down, the floating effect would go off successfully. Your opponent could also make this card miss timing by simply chaining something like MST to its activation, so there was almost never a reason to actually activate this card over just setting it face down. Being able to convert excess terraformings into giant beaters let this card see playing decks that lived or died by their field, like Necro Valley, for quite a few years. This card would finally get its last chance to shine after the rule changing that killed its original combo ages later, in Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links when it was released, and in a couple topping Ancient Gear True Draco decks before fading off completely once again. And coming off at number 9, we have Lightpulsar Dragon. This is a level 6 light dragon that can special summon itself from your hand by banishing a light and dark monster from your graveyard. It can also be brought back from the graveyard by sending a light and dark monster from your hand there instead. It doesn't do anything on the field besides be a 2500 attack beatstick. But when it's sent from the field to the graveyard, you can target a level 5 or higher dark dragon in your graveyard and special summon it. The chaos summoning condition has been the mark of many great boss monsters in the past, such as Blackluster Soldier and Void of the Beginning. And this card is no exception. It was meant to be used alongside its dark counterpart, Dark Flare Dragon, which had the same summoning condition, and it had an effect that could both Foolish Burial and also banish a card from your opponent's graveyard. However, this synergy was far outclassed by how well this went together with Red Eye's Darkness Metal Dragon. Red Eye's Darkness Metal Dragon fit with Lightpulsar's floating effect and allowed you to have an extremely threatening loop if you managed to get both into rotation, since Red Eye's Darkness Metal Dragon could go and revive Lightpulsar Dragon again. Since his floating effect could miss timing, it led to people playing tech cards like Soul Taker, a piece of 1-for-1 removal that makes your opponent gain life points afterwards, which played around this card's revival effect, as the last thing that happened is the life point gain. Chaos Dragons, the deck where this card saw the most play in, was a huge meta threat during the Xyz era, where it could fully abuse broken cards like Pre-Errata Future Fusion and Eclipse Wyvern together with all these huge dragon bodies for really explosive plays. Lightpulsar is a card that would be absolutely busted to this day if it didn't miss timing, as it allow you to get infinite link material once Master Rule 4 rolled around if paired with Pre-Errata Red Eye's Darkness Metal Dragon. And at number 8, we have Fire and Ice Hands. These were a pair of cards which dominated the meta upon their release at the tail end of the Xyz era. They're level 4 monsters with mirror stats and really similar effects. When it's destroyed by an opponent's card, Fire Hand can target and destroy an opponent's monster, and then floats into an Ice Hand from the deck. Ice Hand does the same thing, but pops a spell and trap card and floats into a Fire Hand instead. Neither of these effects are once per turn, which often led to entire fields being torn apart by a chain of Fire and Ice Hands attacking into an opponent's attack position monster. These two cards also had decent stats, had 1600 and 1400 attack, and were level 4, giving you access to the best Xyz toolbox of the time as well. Playing around these cards constitutes a huge part of hat format, where many decks splash the hand engine as a powerful control tool. It was important to leave your beaters in defense position in case you had no way to prevent the hands from attacking into them. You could also prevent them from going off by protecting your cards with something like Stardust Spark Dragon or Bujinji Hair, since these cards had to destroy a card in order to float. And of course, since they're on this list, they can miss timing as well. Making the hands unable to activate their effects is one of the best ways to play around them. One of the easiest ways to do so was destroy them as a Chain Link 2 by activating Evil Swarm Excitonite in response to another card's effect. Still, even if they did have lots of counterplay, they were still a mainstay of the format. And it wasn't uncommon to see many inexperienced players losing their really wide boards full of big bodies to the sole normal summon of a Fire Hand. And at number 7, we have Elemental Hero Stratos. A level 4 warrior that, when normal or special summoned, lets you either destroy spell and traps on the field up to the number of other hero monsters you control, or to add a hero card from your deck to your hand. This is probably one of the most popular monsters in the game, but differently from other juggernauts such as Dark Magician and Blue Eyes White Dragon, Stratos was actually extremely good for years. Being one of the first normal summons that makes you +1, while also having a decent body at 1800, this card got itself limited almost instantly on release, and would even go on to be banned for years later. Even at just one copy, getting to it was hardly difficult, since it's also one of the most easily searchable monsters in the game. You can get it either using the archetypal Rhoda or the actual Rhoda. Stratos can miss timing on its normal summon effect, which is actually not that uncommon, and happens on many good normal summons at the time, such as Armageddon Knight and all of the gadgets. That's usually not as relevant as missing the timing on floating effects, since you're pretty much always normal or special summon them as a chain link 1 anyways. It was just a tad more relevant in hero decks, since they'd often play Call the Haunted to be able to get Stratos' effect another time after it was removed from the field. It was important to watch out when responding to other cards with Call the Haunted in hero beat decks, since you'd miss out on a Surge removal if bringing back Stratos as a chain link too. These hero decks would eventually get Elemental Hero the Shining later on, another great monster which you would never want to miss timing on as well. Coming in at number 6 is Dupe Frog. This is a level 2 water aqua with 100 attack and 2000 defense. Its effects on the field are that it's treated as Death Frog on the board, and that monsters your opponent controls cannot target monsters for attacks except for this one. Also, when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can add 1 frog monster from your deck to your hand. Dupe Frog may look unassuming at first, but this card has seen a lot of play in countless decks throughout the years. Its effects to prevent attacks doesn't mention itself by name, which means that having 2 Dupe Frogs out in the field will prevent your opponent from attacking entirely. This was a really powerful lock back in the day, and could be set up easily while Substitute was legal. Black Rose Dragon was one of the best outs for it back then, but even then it would trigger both Dupe Frog's floating effects, letting the frog player instantly get their card advantage back. Later on, this card was used almost exclusively as fodder for Ronin Totem, which can special summon itself by banishing a frog monster from the graveyard. This had an interesting interaction in Frog Monarch decks with Sea Lancer, which can equip banished Dupe Frogs to itself to gain an attack, and then pop them to protect itself from destruction, something which does not make the Dupe Frogs miss timing. Later on, with the release of Totally Awesome, this card's battle protection effect became very relevant, as it can summon out a dupe straight out from the deck during your opponent's standby phase, and also use it as negation fodder. This led the Dupe Frog seeing regular play in Paleozoic decks, which could easily turbo out Totally due to the Paleos being level 2 Aquas when special summoned back to the field. Nowadays, Dupe Frog sees play once again in Sprite decks. That deck has a really easy time turboing out Totally through its powerful extra deck monsters, and sideboard threats like Alpha and Pankratops can be made much more manageable if there is a Dupe Frog protecting the board. And at number 5, we have Thunder Dragon Titan. This is a level 10 light Thunder Fusion monster which requires 3 Thunder Dragon monsters as materials, but it can also be special summoned by banishing a Thunder monster from your hand and a Thunder Fusion monster you control. Its main effect is that, when a Thunder monster's effect is activated in the hand, you can destroy 1 card in the field. It can also protect itself from card effect destruction by banishing 2 cards from your graveyard instead. When it comes to Thunder Dragon Fusion monsters, people are more likely to loathe Colossus due to its crippling Floodgate effect, but Titan is still a worthy boss monster in the archetype. Lots of Thunder builds used to run instant fusion just to bring out Kaminari attack, a useless vanilla, to make it easier to bring this monster out. Its summoning condition would actually help you trigger the Thunder Dragon monster's effects, since they all trigger when banished, but summoning this out through a Thunder Dragon Fusion by shoveling back materials from your graveyard and banish zone was just as good. A not too hard to bring out monster with great disruption effects and a huge body at 3200 attack and defense at that, the only real downside to Titan is how its destruction effect works. The Thunder Dragon archetype has a lot of hand effects, a couple of which are even spell speed too, but just having them in hand was no guarantee that Titan could actually destroy something, since its effect must be chained immediately after a monster effect is activated in the hand, and priority passes when you activate an effect. Titan can miss the activation timing of its effect if your opponent activates a card effect in response to your Thunder monster in hand. This was a crucial thing to know to play around Thunder decks during TOS format, as you could hold onto your quick effects to waste its activations without hindering your own game plan. But even with this easy counterplay, a non-targeting pop is still worth the trouble, and the deck was a huge force in the meta at the time, up until Colossus got put on the ban list. And coming in at number 4, we have Torrential Tribute. This is a normal trap with a very simple effect. It destroys all monsters when a monster is summoned. Torrential has been a great staple pretty much ever since release, and it's no wonder it has spent over a decade on the limited list. This card has been a very nice tool to punish overextending throughout the years, and used to be something you'd be guaranteed to see almost every deck running. Torrential though, like most similar on-summon effects such as Bottomless Trap Hole, will miss timing and be unable to be activated if either a summon happens as a chain link 2, or in some special circumstances. In earlier formats, Call the Haunted could be chained to something to make your board not be able to be hit by Torrential on that summon. Additionally, cards like Battle Fader and Starlight Road would naturally skirt around it, since the last thing that happened would not be the summon, but rather the battle phase ending, or a card effect being negated respectively. In more modern times, this card matched up a bit badly with Paleozoic monsters. Since these monsters summon themselves in response to the activation of another trap card, their summons themselves can never be hit by Torrential Tribute, since they will always be at Chainlink 2 or higher. Also, Eldritch players have to pay close attention when using this card, as they often want to trigger it on the summon of their trap monsters to blow up their whole field on demand, and this cannot be done if the card was summoned in a chain to something else. All in all, this card has remained one of the most powerful normal traps in the game from inception to this day, even if nowadays it's only a really scary card when paired with Solemn Strike, a counter trap that makes sure nothing short of another counter trap card will stop the incoming field nuke. And at number 3, we have Yazi, Evil of the Zing. This is a level 7 worm synchro monster that cannot be targeted by your opponent's card effects. It lets you target a Yangzi monster you control and one card your opponent controls and destroy both of them. Also, when it's destroyed by battle or card effect, it floats into a worm monster from the deck in defense position. The Yangzings are a synchro-based worm archetype packed to the brim with powerful floating effects, with the caveat that they can all miss timing. Yazi is one of their strongest synchro options, only behind the banned Denglong. In Yangzing decks, this card was one of their best options for removal, as it could trigger one of your Yangzing's floating effects without making it miss timing, since it destroys both cards in the field at the same time. Since Yazi itself can't be targeted, it couldn't be hit by something like an Effect Veiler, and you would generally need a very specific card to remove this card without getting its floating effect off, such as activating a Ritual Beast Steeds as a Chainlink 2. Later on, even if the Yangzing archetype fell off, this card would see heavy play with Destrudo, an easy Synchro 7 enabler in the Link era. After popping something, you'd float into Mare, which gives you 4 Link materials total with its thrice per turn token generation effect. In modern times, this card is something you're guaranteed to see in Sword Soul decks. The deck can sometimes go into it with either their level modulation effect or by normal summoning a level 3 hand trap in a pinch. Even though Yazi can actually miss timing, it's probably the card on this list where the downside matters the least. Its natural protection helps it play around most removal by default, making its floating effect get triggered almost exclusively by its own effect. And at number 2, we have Paleozoic Dinomischus. This is a normal trap card that lets you target a face-up card in the field and then discard one card and banish it. Also, if another trap card is activated while it's in the graveyard, it can special summon itself as a level 2 aqua monster with 1200 attack that's unaffected by monster effects and banish itself when it leaves the field. The Paleozoics were an originally Korean exclusive archetype that shook up the meta immediately at release. They all share the effect where they can come back when a trap card is activated as level 2 aquas, where they then become perfect material for their archetypal XCs or totally awesome. The when part on their revival effect makes a huge difference. Or else you would just be able to chain all of your Paleozoic names in the graveyard to the activation of a trap card, instead of having only being able to do one at a time. This gave these cards similar counterplay to a previous card in this list, Thunder Dragon Titan, as you could also chain quick effects to the activation of an opponent's trap card to make their Paleozoics miss their activation timing. This also has a side effect of making Paleozoic mirrors at the time one of the most skill-intensive matchups of the time, as it was a constant struggle where you had to try and deny your opponent their Paleozoics, while also playing a deck filled with normal trap cards. Dinomischus is probably the best card of the archetype, as not only does it provide an invaluable banish removal of a face-up card, be it a pesky monster or a floodgate, it also discards for effect and not cost. This led to this card seeing play for years as a really good way to trigger floating effects such as Shaddolls, which wouldn't activate if the card was pitched for cost. And finally, at number 1, we have Hot Red Dragon Archfiend King Calamity, a level 12 Dark Dragon Synchro monster that requires 2 tuners and a non-tuner Dark Dragon Synchro monster as its materials. Its effect is that when it's synchro summoned, you can activate its effect to make your opponent completely unable to activate cards and effects for the rest of the turn. In addition, if it destroys a monster by battle, it inflicts burn damage to your opponent equal to that monster's original attack. And if it's destroyed by an opponent's card, it gets to float into any level 8 or lower Dark Dragon Synchro monster from your graveyard. King Calamity has one of the most powerful effects available in Yu-Gi-Oh!, with an effect that's better than VFDs, and as good as Utopic Zexal, 2 banned cards that could never come back to the game. The only thing that ever held this card back was how incredibly difficult it used to be to bring out during your opponent's turn. Nowadays, this card has seen some play as an alternative to Scythe in Punk decks, as the only thing better than locking your opponent out of their extra deck is locking them out of the game entirely. A single E-Telly for Zia Min leads to Chaos Ruler into Halki Fibrax to bring out a level 2 tuner from the deck. Then Chaos Ruler can revive itself from the graveyard, and you now have full material for King Calamity as Christian Halki Fibrax and tag himself into Formula Synchron for a way to quick synchro during your opponent's turn. The only issue with this combo is that this card's on-summon effect will miss timing. So, if you end up having to respond to an effect with your Formula Synchron, your King Calamity will miss timing and go from a game-ending threat to a comically oversetted beater that does nothing during your opponent's turn. To make matters worse, Hulk must be activated during your opponent's main phase, which means they always have their turn priority to use their first card. Many topping lists have built their strategy entirely around this card and making sure it resolves successfully, despite the potential for it to backfire wonderfully. King Calamity has the most powerful effect ever put on a card that misses timing, and thank goodness it does, else there'd be way less counterplay to it. Even so, it easily makes the first on this list due to how powerful the effect is when it does go off. Alright, and that's the list. If you happen to know of any other cards that miss timing or have ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments below.